How sun worship shaped religion, from Sumer to Jesus and Allah. Before there were churches, prophets, and holy books, there was only one cathedral you couldn't ignore: the sky. Our ancestors looked up and watched the same drama play out every single day, the sun rising, dying, and being reborn. And from this silent stage, they began to create gods, myths, and eternal truths. In this series from the Forbidden Wisdom, I'm going to show you something very few people are ready to face: that many of the gods, prophets, and saviors are nothing more than poetic masks for the same main actor, the sun and the secret clock of the stars. From Sumer to Yahweh and the 12 tribes, from Jesus and his 12 apostles to the light of Allah, the same structure repeats itself, hidden in plain sight. You'll understand why so many religions talk about light, about the way, about truth, about rebirth. And you may realize they were never really talking about people, but about cosmic cycles. If that's true, what's left of blind faith? What happens when you discover that the God you were taught to worship has always been, in reality, a code? This is where the story begins. And once you see it, you'll never be able to look at the sky the same way again. Long before anyone uttered the word religion, the sky was already an open book above our heads. For the first farmers, getting the planting season wrong meant hunger. So, they began to watch everything. When the sun rose further to the north, when the cold returned, when certain stars always appeared just before the rains. Little by little, they noticed a pattern. The sky repeated its movements. Time was not chaos, it was code. That's how the firmament stopped being just a backdrop and became a map. Each star turned into a sign, each constellation, a reminder. Up there was a living calendar marking seasons, harvests, times of drought, and times of abundance. Whoever mastered this celestial map had power, could predict, guide, command. But human beings are not satisfied with numbers and dates. We need stories. So these forces began to gain faces, names, wills. A cluster of stars stopped being just a drawing in the dark and became a hunter, a lion, a virgin, a dragon. The sky became a theater, and the heavenly bodies, characters. This is where sacred astrology is born. Long before it was a magazine horoscope, it was the secret language connecting sky, earth, and destiny. The gods didn't have biographies yet, but the script was already written above us. Only one step was missing: to take this cosmic theater and bring the actors down to earth, turning signs and cycles into gods, judges, and saviors. Once that step was taken, a new kind of power would appear, and with it, one of the first avatars of the sun, the God who sees everything, judges everything, and is about to be born in the land between rivers, to remain here below forever. In the south of ancient Mesopotamia, between muddy rivers and clay bricks, a people emerged who would do something revolutionary: place justice under the light of the sun. For the Sumerians, and later for the Babylonians, the sun was not just a bright disk in the sky. It had a name, a will, and eyes that never closed. The Sumerians called him Utu, the Akkadians and Babylonians Shamash. For all of them, he was the same relentless judge. As the sun crossed the sky, people believed Shamash saw every contract, every crime, every lie hidden inside mud houses. Nothing escaped his gaze. That's why he became the god of justice, the patron of laws. When kings wanted to prove their decrees were sacred, they claimed to have received them directly from him. On ancient stelae, like the famous Code of Hammurabi, the king is shown standing before Shamash, seated on a throne, with rays emerging from his shoulders. The message is clear. It is not man who judges, but the sun. Light legitimizes power. Here, astrotheology takes a bold step. The sun's daily movement, rising, reaching its highest point, descending, becomes a metaphor for divine investigation itself. Noon is the moment of truth. Sunset is the hour when all decisions have already been made. But notice the pattern. a visible star, a set of laws, a chosen king, a god who sees everything. It's only the beginning of a formula that will be repeated for millennia, with other names and other masks. If a heavenly body could already judge human beings, what would happen when someone decided to embody that light in human form? In Egypt, the sun was not just a god, it was a daily spectacle, staged with surgical precision on the desert horizon. When the golden disk rose in the east, people saw Ra being reborn from the primordial waters. When it climbed to the height of the sky, blazing mercilessly over stones and pyramids, it was absolute power in action. And when it sank in the west, swallowed by darkness, the most dangerous part of the story began. For the Egyptians, the sun traveled in a sacred boat. By day, it sailed across the sky. By night, it crossed the underworld, fighting monsters, serpents, and forces of chaos. Every sunrise, the birth of the sun was more than a phenomenon. It was proof that order had defeated darkness once again. Ra was not alone. Horus, the celestial falcon, carried the sun in his right eye and the moon in his left. The pharaoh was seen as son of Ra, a kind of earthly representative of this light. Whoever embodies the sun governs. It's no coincidence that crowns, solar discs, and sacred serpents blend in royal imagery. Over time, other names fused with the same principle. Atum, the setting sun. Amun-Ra, the hidden god revealed as light. Aten, the solar disk almost turned into a single god during Akhenaten's reign. Always the same actor, changing masks. In Egypt, the sun becomes a full script of death and resurrection, order and chaos, king and divinity. And this script, later on, will be recycled in ways few people can imagine. Further north, in a strip of land between deserts and seas, another tradition was beginning to turn the sun into messenger, judge, and bridge between worlds. It is there, in the Levant, that the stage will be set for the birth of a single god, and of a people organized into 12 parts. Between the Nile and Mesopotamia, there was another scene, less famous but essential for understanding astrotheology, the celestial stage of Canaan and the Levant. There, in cities like Ugarit, the sun was not a male warrior god, but a goddess, Shapash, the torch of the gods. While Baal, the storm god, played out thunder and rain, Shapash crossed the sky as a silent judge. They said she guided the dead, carried messages between the gods, and illuminated decisions of life and death. When the sun burned high, she was the god's lamp searching the world. When it set, she entered the realm of shadows, carrying secrets no human could hear. Notice how the pattern repeats. Again, the central star of the system becomes arbiter, messenger, bridge between worlds. On clay tablets, Shapash appears as the one who sees what the other gods don't see, who confirms victories, seals pacts, decides destinies. Once more, the sun's light becomes a metaphor for truth and judgment. But something even more important was happening in that same territory. In the middle of this landscape filled with Baal, El, Astarte, and Shapash, a small people would later arise with an explosive idea. Instead of many gods tied to the stars, a single god ruling the entire sky. When this people start writing their own sacred texts, they won't openly say they worship the sun, but they will use the language of light, justice, fire, and glory in a way that looks very much like everything that came before. What happens when this one god silently takes the sun's symbolic throne and organizes an entire people around the number 12? When Israel steps onto the stage, something apparently new happens. Instead of many gods fighting over the sky, a single god appears, claiming everything for himself. He is not the sun, not the moon, not any particular star. He has an unpronounceable name, Yahweh. But, intriguingly, the language used to describe him seems to come straight from the old star cults. The Psalms call him light, glory, sun, and shield. The prophets speak of a sun of righteousness that will rise with healing in its wings. Officially, Israel rejects sun worship. But symbolically, the throne Yahweh occupies is exactly the place that, for millennia, belonged to the central star, source of life, judge, protector, fire that burns and purifies. And around this one, God, a people is organized into 12 tribes, 12 names, 12 territories, 12 stones on the high priest's vest, the same number that marks the months of the year, the divisions of the zodiac, the constellations surrounding the sun's path. In ancient synagogues, centuries later, we find mosaics with the zodiac and the sun in the center, sometimes replaced by symbols of the tribes. It is as if the sky had been translated into human form. In an esoteric reading, Yahweh functions as an invisible sun, the central hidden presence around which 12 human constellations revolve. Each tribe is an angle of the light, an earthly sign of a much older cosmic order. But one ingredient is still missing: a radical vision of light versus darkness, truth versus lie, sacred fire versus impurity, a cosmology that will inflame this symbolism even more. And it will not be born in Israel. It will come from the East, from a people obsessed with eternal flame, judgment, and righteousness, the Persians. When we look at ancient Persia, the light changes tone. Here, the sun is not just a bright disk, it is the reflection of a moral battle. On one side, truth and order. On the other, lie and chaos. At the center of it all, a god of light, Ahura Mazda. In Zoroastrianism, fire is never just fire. In the flames of the temples, priests see the visible presence of divine light. Sun, fire, and truth form a single axis. It's no coincidence that one of the beings revered in the sacred texts is YHWH, the radiant sun, an image of incorruptible light that reveals everything. Then Mithra appears. Originally a guardian of covenants and oaths, over time he becomes inseparable from the idea of light, vigilance, and justice. No lie escapes Mithra. He sees, he hears, he charges. Once again, the same pattern. A being linked to light who judges, tests, and separates the faithful from the traitors. This Persian universe did not remain isolated. For centuries, Jews lived under the rule of Iranian empires, absorbing, little by little, the idea of a cosmic war between light and darkness, angels and demons, final judgment, purification by fire. It is as if the ancient image of the sun as judge had gained a new moral script. Either you stand with the light or against it. But this story of victorious light, of truth that cannot be extinguished, is still going to take on a new form. A form that blends philosophy, art, empire, and the cult of power. Because while the sacred fire burned in Persian temples, further west, another kind of sun was beginning to dominate the imagination. The crowned sun in a golden chariot, blessing armies and emperors. The next stage is Greece, and above all, Rome. And there, the sun will put on the armor of empire. In Greece, the sun was not just a ball of fire in the sky, it was the axis of a vast divine theater. Helios crossed the firmament in his chariot, watching over humans and gods. Later, Apollo, god of music, medicine, and reason, increasingly came to be identified with light. Brightness ceased to be merely physical. It came to mean clarity of mind, balance, illumination of consciousness. The sun's light became a metaphor for awareness. At the top of this structure stood Zeus, lord of thunder and lightning, surrounded by a circle of 12 Olympian gods. 12 seats around the main throne. Look at this symbolically, and it's hard not to see the old pattern, a center of power with 12 forces around it, like a sun surrounded by the constellations, or a central disk encircled by 12 sections of the sky. The Greeks may not have said this literally, but the archetype was already there, breathing beneath the myth. When Rome inherited and blended these cults, the sun took on an even more direct function, to legitimize the empire. The Romans were masters at taking foreign gods, renaming them, and putting them at Caesar's service. Helios, Apollo, and Eastern solar deities converged into a powerful figure, Sol, the Roman sun god. In the 3rd century, Emperor Aurelian raised this cult to a new level, creating the title Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, perfect for an empire that refused to admit defeat. Coins began to show the emperor beside the sun, both with radiant crowns. The message was simple: just as the sun rules the sky, Rome rules the earth. Even the calendar was drawn into the game. The festival of the birth of the unconquered sun was celebrated around December 25th, just after the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, when the days, having reached their darkest point, slowly begin to grow longer. It is the return of light after the longest night. Centuries later, that same date would be associated in the Christian world with the birth of another son, Christ. Officially, no one says it's because of Sol Invictus. But the effect is the same. The old feast of the rebirth of the physical sun is covered by the celebration of the birth of the light of the world. The archetype continues, only the costume changes. In Greece and Rome, the sun becomes reason, order, imperial power, victory over darkness. The symbolic structure is complete, a luminous center surrounded by 12, tied to an empire and a promise of total victory. Now picture this world saturated with light, coins with rays, temples facing east, festivals celebrating the invincible sun, and suddenly a preacher appears in a marginal province, surrounded by 12 disciples, claiming to be the light of the world, announcing a kingdom that cannot be destroyed. Is it just historical coincidence, or the old sun, once again reappearing with a new name, a new narrative, and a cross instead of a chariot? When Jesus steps onto the scene, the Roman world is already saturated with solar symbols. Coins carry emperors crowned with rays, temples celebrate Sol Invictus, and December 25th marks the rebirth of the sun after the longest night of the year. In this setting, a Jewish rabbi on the fringe of the empire appears, surrounded by 12 disciples, and starts saying things that, to anyone with an ear for symbolism, sound like an earthquake. In the Gospel of John, he declares, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life." For a simple peasant, that was already intense. For someone used to seeing the sun as the light of the world, source of life, judgment, and warmth, this phrase has another layer. It's as if a man were claiming, in code, the symbolic place that for millennia belonged to the central star. Soon after comes another famous statement: "I am the way, the truth, and the life." The way. The sun is the great marker of direction, east and west, sunrise and sunset, the daily path in the sky guiding travelers. Life. Without sunlight, there is no harvest, no warmth, no biosphere. Everything dies. Truth. The sun exposes, reveals, uncovers. In full daylight, it's impossible to hide dust under the rug. Among all the gods imagined, the sun is the only absolutely tangible one. You can deny it with words, but not with your eyes. Centuries earlier, the prophet Malachi had spoken of a sun of righteousness rising with healing in its wings. Christian tradition applies that title to Jesus, seeing in him the dawn of a new spiritual cycle. The light that heals, warms, reveals, and separates wheat from chaff. Here, the physical sun and the messianic sun begin to merge into a single metaphor, and the pattern sun plus 12 reappears powerfully, just as we saw gods surrounded by 12 forces, tribes, signs, Olympian gods. Now we have Christ at the center and 12 apostles around him. Israel already had 12 tribes. Jesus rebuilds this map in miniature, forming a human zodiac around himself. Each apostle is a type, a facet, a constellation. The spiritual sun at the center, the 12 orbiting. Ancient Christian art didn't take long to make this symbolism explicit. In a 3rd century mosaic, in the necropolis beneath St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, Christ is depicted as Helios, or Sol Invictus, in a solar chariot. with rays emerging from his head. It is literally the old sun god with a new name, Jesus. The visual message is too direct to be dismissed as coincidence, and scholars recognize this deliberate syncretism between Christ and Rome's victorious sun. From the standpoint of official theology, Jesus is not a star god. He is the incarnate Word, not the physical sun. But in symbolic and astrotheological reading, it's hard to ignore the perfect fit. A luminous center, 12 around it, death and return to life, language of light, way, truth, life. A birth date placed on the old feast of the rebirth of the sun. It's as if the solar myth had come down from the sky and put on human skin, with a biography, pain, tears, and a cross instead of a chariot. Popular faith began to adore the person. The collective unconscious kept responding to the archetype. But the story doesn't end here. After centuries of images, halos, mosaics, and syncretism, a tradition will appear that looks at all this and says, enough. No sun with a face, no god in human form, no solar avatars. The next step in our journey is a shock. A religion that insists on an absolutely invisible God, with no image, no statue, no disk in the sky, and yet calls him the light of the heavens and the earth. What happens to the archetype of the sun when it enters the universe of Islam? When we look at Islam after this entire solar journey, it feels like the movie changes genre. After centuries of gods with faces, halos, radiant discs, and human avatars, Islam steps onto the stage with a radical declaration. God has no form, no image, is not the sun, is not a star, is not a man. Allah is absolutely unique, invisible, incomparable. The Quran forbids any identification of God with stars or creatures. The sun and the moon go back to being only signs in the sky, not gods. You do not bow to the sun or to the moon, but to the one who created them. There is no room for a sun god, no son of the sun, no divinity in a human body. Here, the archetype of the solar avatar is cut off abruptly, but the language of light does not disappear. On the contrary, it reaches one of its deepest points in the famous verse of light, 24:35. Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. He is not the sun, not fire, not a literal lamp. He is the light behind all light, the source of all brightness and all guidance. The physical sun becomes just one more lantern, borrowing its glow from this infinite luminosity. Muhammad, the prophet, is not presented as a son, nor as a son of God. He is the messenger, the human mirror that reflects this light without being its source. Islamic mystical tradition will speak of a light of Muhammad not as an incarnate God, but as a primordial radiance through which the world is created. Even so, the boundary is clear. No worship of the prophet, no solar halo turning his person into a deity. In Islam, the archetype of the sun is depersonalized. God is no longer in the shining disk, nor in a hero crowned with rays. He is the invisible light that allows any sun to exist. It looks like the end of the solar avatars, but maybe it is just an invitation to look beyond the figures and seek that light where it has always been, in the silence behind the symbols. Behind temples, pyramids, ziggurats, crosses, and minarets, there has always been the same silent protagonist, light. While peoples changed language, flags, and true gods, the sky kept repeating, day after day, the same simple gesture: rise, cross, disappear, and return. If you've made it this far, you might feel a strange discomfort. While religions argued over names, dogmas, and borders, the sky never changed its script. What if, behind all the names, dogmas, and threats, there has always been a single invitation? To wake up? I know how hard it is to let go of what has been woven into our minds and hearts for so long, even before we were born, passed down by our parents and all our ancestors. Changing takes courage. The next step is not to choose a new religion, nor to collect more hidden information. It's to make a far more dangerous move, to take your eyes off the images out there and ask, in silence, what kind of light still exists in here? The one that makes you question, that stops you from mistaking lies for truth, that refuses to let you live on autopilot. Maybe the real sun worship was never about the star in the sky, but about the courage to look straight at what it symbolizes. Clarity, consciousness, responsibility. The question that remains is simple, and no one can answer it for you. Do you want to go on defending symbols? Or are you ready to face what they were pointing to all along?
I will reveal the forbidden wisdom.